Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 141, Red Alert, Suicidal Spouses Who Suffer in Silence, Part 1. Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining me for today's podcast episode where we are actually going to talk about something that is super important and not always easy to talk about, but I think everyone listening is going to know that we need to talk about it. This has to do with mental and emotional health. We are all very aware that the suicidal numbers have increased tremendously over the past few years. And we need to have some positive discussions about it that are very based in the methodology of how to help. And this applies to anyone and everyone. Because if we look at the statistics, we have the tweens who are now suicidal, right? Starting even from ages 9 and 10. We have the teenagers who are really struggling with their identity. And we also have parents who have young kids who are in their 30s and 40s and in the mix of all the busyness of life and careers. And yet at the same time, we also have aging parents who are also facing suicidal thoughts. And so this really could affect anyone that we know. And chances are that we actually probably know somebody right now at this moment who is struggling with suicidal thoughts. And if we don't know some of the warning signs and the codes and sometimes hidden messages, we could miss something super valuable that would allow us to just come in and be that little ray of hope that they need in their lives. We are the bridge builders. And so there's going to be two parts. So in part one, what we're going to talk about is just of the fears that we have in even talking about it, because sometimes we think we have to solve every aspect of what they're going through. We're going to talk about some myths and facts. And then we're going to talk about some of the signs and these hidden codes that are not always so obvious. And then in part 2, we're going to talk about the actual things that we can do. There are 3 main things we can do without being a trained professional. Anybody can do these 3 things, and they are significant, and they fear that they will be rejected if they bring that topic up, right? That someone won't know how to listen or how to respond, or will just brush it off as insignificant. And so they don't want to face that rejection because they are already in their own turmoil, and thinking that they could be rejected is just one more thing that they don't want to go through. So a lot of times they will suffer in silence. Now, I really want us to just pause for a minute and think about this. Imagine your teen son or imagine your spouse, right? A lot of times we think our husband is manly and he's going to work and he's paying the bills and he's doing the stuff. And we know that maybe he has moments of stress, and we may be oblivious that our husband may be having thoughts of suicide. And so we should just really open our minds that there is no category that only these kinds of people or certain kinds of people will have these types of thoughts. It could be anybody, and it could even be your own spouse. And so we want to be able to have that in the back of our mind, like maybe there is stuff going on and I've just been unaware. I don't know the warning signs. So a lot of times what will happen when someone is suffering in silence, they don't know how to speak about it clearly or effectively, or they have these fears. So they will often use codes. And so we are going to talk about that. But I think it's such an important point to really hang on to, that if someone is in that place, a lot of times they're not going to just come out and say it. And so they will start to use these more subliminal kind of messages in hopes that someone will pick up on it. Talking about suicide with somebody who may show these signs is actually very relieving for them. It doesn't make it worse for them, and it doesn't actually make them think about it more. If you are afraid yourself to talk about it with someone or ask them a question about it, you are not the one that is introducing the idea to them. If they do show some of these signs, they have already thought about it long before your sentence or your approach or your question to them. And so they are already in their own pain, and actually being able to talk about it, and the fact that someone might ask them a question about it relieves their suffering instantly. It offers that relief, that sigh of relief, that breath of fresh air for that moment. It happens right then and there. Even if you haven't solved anything right away, that's okay. So it's so good for us to know and have that confidence that being able to start the conversation with someone is already helping them. It's already providing hope and relief. So I also want to really point out, before we jump into some of these myths, that one of the most important things we can do is listen. We all have ears. We all know what it means to listen, even if we're not the best listener. Listening is such a huge component to just being on the other side, letting someone know, hey, I'm here for you. I may not have all the answers, but I am here. I'm giving you my full love and attention, and you are not alone. Even if you have to keep your mouth quiet and closed for a little bit, just listen. That will do huge for them. It will help restore their hope, and that is going to be so instrumental for them. If we are on the other end of someone who does start talking about it, we don't need to feel guilty or timid or shy because we're not the expert. You don't need to be the expert. And so I want everyone to really feel confident to be a good listener, or to start these conversations or have these conversations when you're not the expert. No one is probably having that expectation on you to solve everything or be the expert into it. So don't have that for yourself. Just be that good person in the relationship who can be there and can be that good listener. That's all you need to be. You don't need to be anything more than somebody who is showing up and trying to love them the best that you can. So just enter into those situations if they come up with confidence, like, I can listen. Even if that's all I can do, I can listen. And that provides hope and relief right then and there. Okay, so let's dive into a few of these myths. Okay, another myth is that if we confront someone and if we talk to them about it, that it will actually make them angry, and that our words are going to be what pushes them to actually do it. And this is just not true. In fact, the science and the studies show that when we have these conversations and we ask them questions about what they're going through and their struggles, their anxiety lowers. It actually lowers. And when their anxiety goes down and their stress goes down and the communication starts to open up, their risk of taking that final impulsive act or planned act, it actually goes down. We really need to remember that that is what actually happens, and not allow our brain to kind of continue thinking, oh, I will just make it worse, or talking about it will make it worse. No, that's not the case. It actually lowers the chances of things escalating to that level. Another myth is that if someone's not talking about it, then they are not going to do it. Well, that's also just not true. A lot of times when someone doesn't talk about it, they will do. We have to make sure that we are aware that it could be both sides of that spectrum. Another myth is that once a person decides to die by suicide, that there is nothing anyone can do about it. And this just isn't true. Suicide is actually very preventable. It actually is very preventable. So when we look at the number of suicides and how much they have increased, experts know that it is preventable. And so this is a huge tragedy that it's on the rise, and the preventative measures are not being taken because a lot of times we don't know. But it's also good to know that any type of positive interaction, any type of thought of hope and relief are all preventative measures. So that's why us being able to listen and have some of those conversations are so valuable in the prevention of suicide. And again, that goes back to relationships. How are we developing our relationships? Are we checking in with the people that maybe becoming a little bit more angry and irritable? That might be a clue that we need to tune in just a little bit more. And this is why the concept of developing our relationships with other people is so valuable, and learning the skills that allow us to do that and make those relationships so important in our lives. Okay, so let's go over some of these clues and know that these are often codes. And a lot of times they're going to be obvious. Sometimes they're not going to be obvious, but that all of them are that indication that someone is thinking about suicide. So it's time for us to become more aware and recognize them. So the first one we want to talk about is just things that are obvious and direct. These are direct verbal clues. A lot of times they'll just say something like, well, I've decided to kill myself, right? They're just kind of at that point. They're just going to be obvious and direct. They might say something like, I wish I was dead. This happens. Sometimes they will do this also in a roundabout way where it's like an if-then statement. Well, if I don't pass this test, I think I'm just going to kill myself, right? This can happen a lot with teens when they feel a lot of pressure in academics and school. Also when they're thinking about their future and going to college and getting scholarships. In marriage, someone might say like, well, if my spouse has an affair, I just don't think that I'm going to survive that. If I lose my job, or the finances take a major turn, they might say something like, if this happens, then my solution is going to be taking my own life. And so it's important to know that sometimes it's very obvious and sometimes they have an if-then statement. And these are the ones that are easy for us to pick up on because they're actually saying it. And this is something that they teach in the high schools, these direct and obvious verbal statements. And even when teenagers know this, a lot of times they will dismiss it and say, oh, that person's just looking for attention. We need to eliminate that sentence from our thinking because they are not seeking attention. They have actually considered suicide as a solution. So if anyone says that, it is time to pay attention to that person. The second way that we will see signs is through indirect verbal clues. So this might look something like, well, I'm just kind of tired of my life. I'm just kind of tired of how things are going, and I just don't think I can go on. That is like not the most obvious, saying I'm going to kill myself, but it's saying I don't know any other way. I can't keep doing this. I can't continue like this. Another really common one is to my family. And that could easily be the clue for us to go, oh, wait a minute. They might be considering this because they don't know how to say it directly. So they're using these indirect vocabulary and these phrases. They might put it in the form of a question like, well, who would actually care if I wasn't there tomorrow? Would anyone notice? Would anyone really miss me? Would it actually make a difference? Those are indirect clues that they are thinking it. If they something like, I just want out, that's also another way that they might be saying it. Sometimes they might just say something like, well, I won't be around much longer anyways. I'm going to do this thing because I'm not going to be around much longer anyways. So it's almost like they're eliminating any future consequences that might be negative. That could be a sign and a clue that we need to tune in a little bit more. Another one that is also common is, well, pretty soon you won't need to worry about me anymore. And if we hear that, I hope our ears will perk up and say that's one of those indirect ways of saying they are actually thinking about suicide. So let's move on to another category, which is kind of the behavioral clues. If they've done anything super reckless or have attempted suicide before, it's good for us to just have that awareness and to know, because they might attempt it again. And so if we know that that has been a part of their past, and then we hear some of these verbal clues, now we're getting multiple, and that is a big sign for us that we need to try to pay closer attention to them and be a listening ear. If they try to get a gun or some kind of weapon and show this new interest and feel very determined to get a weapon, or if they start putting together pills and you're noticing that this is happening, or you find that pills go missing in the house, that could be a clue that, hey, they're making some plans. If there's an increase in their anger or their irritability, their moodiness, or their hopelessness, then that could be a sign that we need to pay closer attention to what's going on with them. They will get their will taken care of, or they will create a trust in advance to them carrying out their plan of suicide. And sometimes they will even call people they haven't talked to in quite some time and kind of go through their goodbyes. And again, it's not always obvious, like, goodbye, I won't be here tomorrow. But sometimes there's a form of, or a sense of, you might not be seeing me around as often as you think. A lot of times they will give away things that are personal to them, that they valued, their prized possessions. And another time, or at other times, we may see that things that they actually really enjoyed, they have lost interest in. So things that used to bring them a lot of happiness and joy and peace, they have really just left behind and no longer want that to be a part of it, because they know that they're just going to leave it behind. They may turn to vices with an increased level, and you may find that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, they're just using drugs or drinking heavily, whereas before maybe they were an occasional drinker. And also any unexplained, really intense negative emotions could be those warning signs, like there is something deeper happening and they might not be talking about it. In a different type of category, we have clues that are a little bit more situational. So when a person feels like all of a sudden there's this change in their life and they can't escape it, like a change in their income or a change in their job, and they don't feel like they have the ability to actually manage that change, and you're watching them not manage it, that could be a really big clue. If they're being fired from work, or kids who start getting expelled from school, that could be a sign like, hey, they are going through stuff that they actually cannot manage. They don't have the coping skills that are healthy and positive and help them move forward. They're lacking them. So now it's leading to these other situations that could be that shining light that there's other things going on. Sometimes if there's a move in the family, maybe a teenager really didn't want to move, but the family moves, or with the older population, if they had to make that change into a nursing home and they really didn't want to, that could be that starts to spark and trigger thoughts of suicide. If there's any major loss of an important and valuable relationship, or there's major changes in that relationship, that could also lead to thoughts of suicide that they may not have had before. And it could be very new for them. It could be very scary. Another situation that might trigger someone to start thinking about suicide is the death of somebody else that they know, that they were close to. If they had a friend who also died by suicide, this often triggers that person, if they were struggling, to start thinking about suicide. Also, the diagnosis of a serious illness or a terminal illness could sometimes, if there is a change in a person's experience of freedom, especially if there's a loss of freedom, as if maybe someone's going to go to jail for something, a crime that they've committed, that situation might be the catalyst of what gets them thinking about suicide as an option for a way out. Sometimes I think what comes with that is they are afraid of the consequence. They are afraid of the punishment, and that they won't be able to handle that type of consequence. They won't be able to handle the punishment. And they have a fear about what that will look like, what the experience of going through the actual consequence or punishment will be. And that fear becomes so great that the only option that they see out of that is to take their own life. If they think that there is going to be a sudden loss in their finances and that they won't be able to recover them or get through them or work through them, that could also be one of those situational clues that they could head down that path of thinking that is their only solution, their only option. Sometimes when someone is having suicidal thoughts, they really do see that as the only option. Their brain is so stressed and so overwhelmed with all these negative thoughts and emotions that they can't tap into the higher part of their brain that does think creatively, that does think outside the box, that does think, hey, there's lots of ways to approach this. They're not tapped into that part of their brain, and it's hard for them to get to that part of their brain and unlock those things. And so sometimes when for another person to be in a relationship with, and they will start to feel like what they require in their own lives will be a burden for their spouse or their own children or their parents, whatever it is, that they are just too much and too much of a burden. So if we take a step back and look at all of these different warning signs, these clues, some of the obvious ones and some of the not so obvious ones, what we're going to see is that a lot of these signs, and pretty much all of them, really reside in the brain. These are all thoughts. And from life coaching, and especially from the self-coaching model, our thoughts are key. Our thoughts are what trigger any emotion we feel. So if we're feeling hopeless and fear, and we don't want to be rejected, and that there's no other solution except suicide, the feelings that come with it are a result of the thoughts that are being thought about. So in life coaching, we teach a skill called the self-coaching model, and it has 5 main components. And thoughts is where all of our power is. It's the second component of the self-coaching model. And this model really shows us where our power is in life. But since most people don't know it, they don't know what to do with these negative thoughts. They don't know, hey, this is just one thought I have in the situation I'm facing, and there is actually something I can do about that thought. Most of us will be on default mode. And so if our brain delivers us a thought like there's only one way out, we don't know always that what we can do with that. So our brain will just go, well, that's the thought I'm having, so there is no other way. We believe that all of our thoughts that we're having, especially the one that's most present in our mind, is true. And this actually is just not factual. Most of the thoughts that we have are based on assumptions. They're based on our interpretations of them. They're based on our own experiences from the past and our filters. And so we really need to start challenging our thoughts. And we need to be able to develop the skill of knowing, is this thought coming to me automatically? Is it coming to me on autopilot and default? Is this thought just coming to me unintentionally without me choosing the specific thought that is causing me all the distress? But this is a skill that most of us are never taught in elementary school or junior high or high school. And unless we're going into getting a degree in college that deals with psychology and how the brain works, most humans are going to go through their entire life not knowing this concept, and that they can challenge their own thoughts and exchange them and decide to think a new thought on purpose and create a new thought in whatever situation they face. So this skill is so valuable. And the skill of knowing the self-coaching model and being able to challenge your own thinking and your own thoughts, it's so powerful that it can be used in any situation that we face. So in my podcast and in my business, I talk a lot about marriage, I talk a lot about relationships, and I talk a lot about intimacy. And this is the foundational tool that we use, the self-coaching model. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is because this podcast is also related to those things, our relationships, our marriage, intimacy. But we know deep down that intimacy is not just about the sexual experience. It is so much more than that. It is so encompassing, and it is very much based in how we are thinking about the relationship, how we think about ourselves, how we think about our spouse, and how we think about the interactions that are taking place on a daily basis. So I really want to encourage any of you that have been interested in learning the self-coaching model a little bit deeper to take that step, because as you learn that skill in the context of your marriage, you can apply it to this concept of suicide as well. And your ability to be able to lower those thoughts that would lead to suicide, you're going to realize just how much power you have over them. If you learn these concepts when the risks are low or medium, like there's just starting to be problems now, learn the self-coaching model now as a preventive measure so that things don't escalate and they don't get worse. And the more you start using the self-coaching model right away, then the chances of you even heading down those roads are decreased significantly. So this is a very healthy thing that each of you listening can do as a preventative and proactive measure. So even if you aren't really struggling with suicidal thoughts right now, just know that by taking this course, it acts as a preventative measure. Even if you think maybe 5 years down the road or 10 years down the road, maybe things could change for the negative, this will help. Also, being able to know the skill and this technique of using the self-coaching model, the minute you start using it, the minute you learn about it and start applying it and practicing and experimenting with it. That is the exact minute you start infusing your life with hope. It's in that exact moment that you give it a shot, that you are already providing yourself that hope, that relief. And that is going to feel like a step in the right direction. It's going to feel very empowering, which is the exact opposite of how people feel when they are thinking about suicide. Now, right now on my website, shelley.andersoncoaching.com, you can buy this course all by itself for $97. But the other option as well is if you join the Make It Meaningful membership, which is only $39 a month, and you get that course absolutely free. And I just also want to throw out there that the beauty of being in the membership is that we use the self-coaching model every single month on a variety of aspects of relationships. And so you're constantly and continually being invited to use the self-coaching model in new and different areas of your life. So it's very positive, it's very proactive, and the more you become familiar using it, the more helpful it actually is. So make sure you get on the website and check those things out, those two options, either the course or the membership, as a way to help yourself, your spouse, and anyone else that you know learn about this amazing and incredible skill, the self-coaching model. Now, as we end part one, I want to leave you with the website of a very quick and easy training for suicide prevention. It's called QPR Institute. So look that up. It's a very easy course to take in suicide prevention. But also I want to end with giving you the suicide prevention hotline for yourself or for anyone you know. You can just write down this phone number and put it into your phone right away. It's 1-800-273-8255. And this next week, I really want you to think about these warning signs, these clues, these codes, and really increase your own awareness in them, because usually what's going to happen is the person you least expect is going to start showing these signs. And once you know them, you'll be able to clue in and say, now it's go time. I'm going to be a good listener. I'm going to give this person all my love and attention in this moment. So remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy and knowledge within yourself, the more you can restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and I hope you will join me next week for part 2 of this important topic.